Good morning, everybody. My name is James Kashangaki, and I'm going to be emceeing this event. In my day job, I am the Chief Program Officer of FSD Kenya, which I do far better than I do emceeing. But we'll go quickly to the event. Welcome to the launch of the small firms. I have to get it right, otherwise I'll get killed. Welcome to the launch of the new findings of the Small Firms Diaries, Kenya. The Small Firms Diaries was done in a number of countries, which you'll hear about. But I'd like to take this opportunity to invite my boss, CEO, and colleague, Tamara Cook, to come to the stage and welcome everybody officially.
Thank you, James. Can we give him another hand of applause? In many things in life, we need to do things outside of our comfort zone, and emceeing is outside of his, but he's doing a great job, so let's continue to encourage him. It is my pleasure to welcome you here. This has been a long journey, and I think this journey probably started more than 10 years ago, really, when FSD Kenya first started with the household financial diaries here in Kenya. And it's great to see people in this room who were part of that. And we learned so much about households here in Kenya through those financial diaries that surprised us and also confirmed things that we thought we knew, but now we felt we had more evidence. And Tim will tell you more about the methodology of diaries and things like that later. But what we wanted to do today is to share with you these initial findings. And let's be clear, this is just the beginning of a conversation from the Kenya Small Firm Diaries. So what I would like to do after welcoming you is just set the context a bit more as we dig into this research. But first, I'd just like to welcome the different categories of people here. And so just even though not everybody online can necessarily see everybody in the room, I would like to welcome our advisory group, who's been advising here in Kenya, who've been advising us all along the way. If you're part of the advisory group, just give a little wave. Thank you. They're the ones asking difficult questions of the data, saying, wait, you said this, why is that happening? And those questions can then be fed back into the methodology to be able to go back and ask people. So, well, let me not steal Tim's thunder. I won't share any of the actual findings. That's great. We also have people who are participating in Small Firm Diaries from other countries who are joining us today. So if you're from another country and you have a Small Firm Diaries going on in your, can you wave at us? I think we've got Uganda and Nigeria, Ethiopia, and some other countries. So it's really great that this is not just a Kenya conversation, but it's a global conversation. The Gates Foundation is the one that told us that this was happening. And we found out that Kenya had not been included in the initial selection of countries. And to their credit, one of their colleagues said, you know, we think Kenya would be a really valuable addition to this. And FSD Kenya agreed. And so through a bit of a negotiation, we were able to put together some funding to add Kenya to this incredible global study. And we think that Kenya has a very interesting environment, which you're going to hear more about today. But what we're excited about is not only learning about these important small firms in Kenya, but also comparing them to the other countries. The first launch happened in Colombia, but this is the first launch of these surveys here in Africa. So without further ado, if I could get my slides up. I would like to thank not just those who I've already thanked, but there are many people who made this possible in terms of funding. So I've already mentioned the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, also Argidius, the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, and the Aspen Network for Development organizations. Are we able to get my slides up? Can we switch to my computer, please? If not, I'll just tell you what's on my slides. There we are. There's the pretty picture of the launch and all the logos of the people I've just mentioned. So it's really great to have our partners from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and Central Bank of Kenya, especially the research team here in the room. And many of you know that since 2005, we've been partnering at something called the FinAccess Partnership to collect demand-side data on households here in Kenya. The slides I've got up here are showing you three things. And there's a lot of information on one slide, bad practice, but forgive me. At the top left, you see that 13% of households say that their primary income is from business. On that bottom one, the bar chart, it shows you that of those who say their primary income is from business, 29% of them would be considered small firms, the group of businesses that we're talking about today. They wouldn't call themselves firms, but that is the global branding for the study. They would call themselves enterprises or hustlers or business, but 29% are in that category, and Tim will define that a bit more. But interestingly, we wanted to share the one on the right, which shows that there is a declining number of households who say that their primary income is from business. Since 2016, it went from 18% to 16% in 2019. And then perhaps COVID exacerbated this further, bringing it down to only 13% in the 2021 collection. And there's some reasons we think are probably driving this, but one is that we are seeing more people who are saying that they are either dependent or casual laborers, so they're not able to engage in business maybe the way they want to, or those economic opportunities aren't out there. We also know that there's a significantly growing youth population, and as the youth enter the economic years of their lives, they may or may not be able to get the capital they need to start those businesses. And so this has been an interesting trend that we're watching. Moving along, and again, this is all data from the FinAccess to set context for the Small Firm Diaries, which is not nationally representative in the same way. In fact, FinAccess for the first time in 2021 is county representative. So half of small firm owners are actually women. So if you look at the dark blue versus the light blue, when we think of micro firms or micro enterprises, we see more women or micro enterprises than men. Probably not going to surprise you. If you're from Kenya, you know mama mboga, the village stalls, market stalls, more women. But when we come to the small firm definition of 1 to 20 paid non-family employees, it's about half-half men and women, which is interesting. We also see that they are more likely to have higher levels of education than micro firms. Oops, I didn't mean to include this one. Small firms are considerably more banked than micro firms and still rely on community-based finance. So again, the dark blue is the micro firms and the light blue are the small firms. You can see that small firms have more bank accounts, have more mobile money accounts, use mobile money for savings and loans more, use SACCOs or microfinance institutions at twice the level of micro firms, interestingly. But also interesting is they continue to use groups and chamas. So even though they're using formal finance, they are complementing that formal finance with informal financial mechanisms, leveraging their social networks. We were together in Kwale, where we launched this findings first yesterday. And we really wanted to start in the counties where outside of Nairobi, where a lot of this research has happened. A lot of these launches happen in Nairobi. And the people in this room, I know many of you, and it's so great to see your faces, but you tend to be in the headquarters. You tend to be in the higher levels of leadership. And so yesterday we had more the branch manager who's making decisions about what does the head office say about whether I can finance this kind of business? Do the policies allow me to do that? And really being able to engage with them on this data was really powerful. And I think one of the things that we want to continue to do in the launch in Kisumu on Thursday. So as I said, there's the FinAccess data set, but there's something new that the Kenyan government is doing called the MSE Tracker Survey, the Micro and Small Enterprise Tracker Survey. So it's taking those who say they run a business in FinAccess and then tracking them over time to see how their businesses are changing. And when we take that data and compare, again, the micro to the small, you see more use of digital payments, you see more registration, more formalization of the businesses, more training, and even a higher level of kind of consumer credit that they give on to their customers. So as I said, we are excited about all 47 counties in Kenya. They all have needs for households as well as for small firms. This slide is showing you the level of formal financial inclusion for households by county. And I've popped 3 circles around those top 3 counties that we're talking about today. So at the very top, you see that Nairobi is the most formally financially included at 95%. Not necessarily a huge surprise. Then moving down to Kisumu, it's at 88%. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with FinAccess as I am, the national number is around 83%. So both of those are above the national average. Kwale, on the other hand, is a lower included. It's only 73% is included. And it fades because not all of the counties are here, but that goes all the way down to around 58% in West Pokot. So it's really important as we think about the policy implications of this research to remember that not all small firms are the same, not all sectors are the same, and not all geographies are the same. And so it's important that we contextualize the solutions for finance and other things that we provide to small firms. So just to double click a bit on Kwale, which is, like I said, where we were yesterday. We had representatives from the county government, from the national government, from financial sector providers, SACCOs, associations of businesses. We also had some small firms in the room, which was great. In Kwale, you can see that there's a much higher level of dependence than the national average at 50%. About the same on casual work at 29%. But interestingly, when we look at that, do you own a business or is your primary income from business? It's about half the level of the national survey. So just good to remember and think about what is the economic activity in a county and how are these businesses in Kwale doing in relation to the others. If we go to Kisumu, which is where we'll launch this on Thursday, you can see that, again, a little bit higher casual work than the national average. Dependency is a little less, but here, owning a business is actually higher than the national average. And maybe not a surprise as you think about cities and the prevalence of enterprises in cities, but it's just important to remember that's kind of where we are compared to the national average. Nairobi probably shouldn't be just one category given how many people live here. Those of you who've seen me present the FinAccess data before, you'll know that one of my favorite statistics is that there are more people with smartphones in Nairobi than there are people in any other county. Let that sink in for a second. And it gives you a little bit about our dynamic. But if we look at Nairobi overall, it's pretty similar on the casual work, higher on employed, again, not a surprise given how much formal business there is here in Nairobi, and higher on owning a business at 20%. And so if we just think about these 3 locations separately, and even though those are counties, within each county there's kind of some rural, peri-urban, urban businesses that have been selected, you can see the difference compared to the national average there. I've only got 1 slide left, and I think it's the most important. Because we're here today not to have a nice breakfast and some coffee and see some old friends perhaps, but to really consider who are the small firms out there and what do they need from those of us in this room who have the power to deliver new solutions to them. And these are pictures that I took, so sorry if they're not high quality, on my visits to visit some of these small firms in Kwale, Kisumu, and Nairobi. And just to share a couple of things about them. One of the pictures I wanted to put up, but it didn't turn out right, was I was visiting one of the firms, and I asked, how are things going? And he kind of put his hand like this, and he was like, and I was like, can I take a picture of your hand? But it didn't really show up. But to me, that's a lot of what I heard when I met with people. There's some good things, there's some bad things. They always put a positive spin on it, but they're dealing with some significant challenges in running firms, in significant uncertainty that you'll hear more about from Tim. So some of the businesses that you see up here are a butcher, baker, fish processor, Jico, cutting out sandals. I always buy these sandals. I've never seen, I don't know if you can tell. No, you can't really tell up there, but there's like how they cut them out. And so watching them cut those out, making shoes. And I think as we hear see these really cool graphs and everything we think about, let's remember the people behind those stories, the businesses behind those stories, and we'll keep this conversation going. So without further ado, I'll turn back over to our fantastic MC.
Thank you very much, Tamara. And now, without further ado, I will call on Mr. Shehryar Ali, the country manager for MasterCard Foundation, or MasterCard, sorry. MasterCard, to give a short remark.
All right, good morning. Yes, I am from MasterCard and not MasterCard Foundation. And it's a pleasure to be here today. Tamara, thank you for that intro. Great insights are waiting for us, I think, and everybody should be waiting for Tim's session. So I'll try to get out of the way as quickly as I can. So MasterCard, how many of you think we are a cards company? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. God, you really know MasterCard well. No, so we're not cards company. We're kick off back in the day with cards, and that was the need, that solution that was needed at that time to bring in global networks and make your solutions accessible in different parts of the world. But what our core calling is about financial inclusion. So we have made a promise globally that we're going to include 1 billion people into the financial inclusion fold by 2025. And guess what? 50 million of those would have to be micro or SMEs, MSMEs that we want to include, and 25 million would have to be women-owned MSMEs. So today, I just want to firstly thank FSD Kenya, MasterCard Inclusive Center for Inclusive Growth. We've got Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Sorry, I'm just going to read through that. All protocols observed, right? Argidius, and everybody who's actually taken the time out and done the research. Because you see, what happens is, in our quest for technology and solutioning, sometimes we jump the gun and we don't go deep enough to understand what the small firms are actually going through. And it's critical that it's not a time-bound, which if you go and you talk to a small firm during the peak season, you get a different perspective. You go when there's a pandemic like COVID, it's a totally different perspective. And when the going gets tough, inflation rises, or a new big company comes into that geo, the small firms get impacted in a very different way. And so spending 333 days, I was calculating, I know you showed the hours, but it's 333 days of time with the small firms, talking to them, understanding what their problems are. And then not jumping the gun, but actually sharing it with the people in this room who are policymakers, leaders, who will make tomorrow's solutions and design them and make sure that they're fit and then scale them. So in MasterCard, we have a very nice triangle that we generally refer to. So one side of that triangle is the one versus the many, where those who are financially included versus excluded. And so just like Tamara was mentioning, I visited Tai Fu Ku in Molongu. It's a small shop owned by a gentleman called Martin Moenda. Started his business in 2014, sold Unilever products, Coke, and so on and so forth. COVID came, hit real hard in terms of cash flows and access, because this was a small shop, right? Well, MasterCard solutions like Jazaduka came in really handy at that point in time, because you see, if you were Martin before you got onto Jazaduka, you would end up only buying what you could afford for your shop. So when the Unilever van would come or the Coke van would come to give the supplies, you didn't have that cash flow available to purchase what you needed, but only what you could afford. Post that, once we started creating data points as to how the transactions are happening, is Martin buying his inventory once a week or is it once a month, right? we started seeing that there's a pattern. Unilever started seeing a pattern. KCB as the bank, as one of our partners, started seeing the pattern. And we said, okay, it's time to plug in a credit limit here. So here's $100 credit limit, so $1,000 sales turnover on the shop. Here's $100 for Unilever product credit limit. Here's $200 for Coke, right? So now when Martin has to buy, he doesn't have to buy every week. He can buy what he needs rather than what he can afford, and at the same time build a credit history so that tomorrow when he needs to expand his business to multiple shops, he has that option or availability. So that's one side. The second side is around man versus nature. So I visit this artisan market. It's in the Gigiri area, where there's a young lady, and she just came up with candles and soaps that she makes, right? And she's growing her business. And what she does at the back of that is that for every sale, 5% of that goes into plantation of trees. So as simple or nuanced as that is, I know where I'm buying my candles from, because there's this genuine desire to make an impact, even at the small firm level. It's not just about how do I make a living and how do I get by, but there is a greater sense of purpose as the new generation comes into the small firm fold. So I think I would definitely promote and encourage people to actually go and support the small firms in your neighborhoods and try to, give them that confidence and encouragement to grow. Last but not least, and that's why we're here today, at the baseline of this triangle is the short-termism versus long-termism. Companies and entities, make our decisions based on profits, targets for the year, and that's just not the right way for us to approach sustainability and sustained growth. So when we talk about looking at 333 days of insights, findings, tools that you're going to see today, it's priceless, as we say in MasterCard, because that's really going to be the foundation on which you're going to build your strategies, how we're going to support the small firms in general. So I'm really excited about this. I'm sure I'm running over time because I talk too much, but I do want to thank everyone again here for participating, for contributing towards the insights and the research that has been done. And yes, let's come back and see how we can include more and more people and make a bigger impact together rather than by ourselves. Thank you very much.
So thank you to MasterCard Company. And now, of course, everybody's been waiting to find out what these findings are. So I'll ask Tim to come to the stage. Tim Ogden is the Managing Director of the Financial Access Initiative at New York University, and he's been the lead of this study, and so he'll present the results for Kenya. Welcome. Sure, just don't run the battery down.
So I'm going to start just by telling you I have a big problem. And my big problem is I'm the son of a Baptist preacher. And so I never learned how to stand in one place and talk. So unlike a lot of people, I never had any fear of standing up in front of groups and preaching, because that's what I thought everybody did. I thought that's what you did when you grew up. You grew up, you stand up in front of groups and you preach. But I really can't stand here and talk like this. So I'm going to move around some. I'm hoping that's going to be okay for our production teams, as long as I'm staying on the audio. But let me also take a step back and say I'm pretty overwhelmed with gratitude this morning, because this was a crazy idea, what we've done. And somehow along the way, we managed to convince some people that we weren't crazy. Or maybe they thought we were crazy, but they thought, who knows. But I want to especially thank Ali from the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, who was the first person who took a bet on this project. And then Maria May from the Gates Foundation, who came along right afterward and said, hey, if we're going to do this, we're going to go big. We're not just going to do one country. We're going to do a bunch of countries. And then our Gideus Foundation also said, well, if we're going to do this, let's make sure we're learning all the things that we need. But then Anne-Marie Van Swinderen from Lyft sort of jumped right on, experts in financial diaries methodology. And if you can imagine the logistical difficulties of sending people to small firms, 150 small firms in multiple sites in 7 countries for a year, right? That's what Lyft pulled off. I want to thank especially Michelle Kempis and Laura Freschi and Rachel Epley from my team, because I get to stand up here and present these things, but without them, there would have been nothing to present. I would have been doing a tap dance and talking theoretically. But we're not going to talk theoretically today. We're going to talk about the real lives, the real financial lives of small firms. And I want to kick off by showing you a little video to really give you a flavor of what this is, because what we've done is really quite different than most studies have done. So can we cue the video?
Kwa majina naitwa Rehema Kasim Rico. Mimi ni mkazi wa Vanga, nilizaliwa Vanga, nimeolewa Vanga, nimezaa Vanga. Biashara zangu ni za kuchemsha dagaa. Sasa nina miaka takribani 20 yafika.
The Small Farm Diaries follow the financial lives of nearly 1,000 businesses in 7 countries, visiting them weekly for a full year. Rehema is one of the 155 small farm owners who participated in Kenya. Small farms like Rehema's are a distinct group of businesses. They are large enough to serve as a source of employment in their communities, and they play key roles in local value chains. They experience a lot of ups and downs in both income and expenses. This volatility affects their own households and their workers. Sardine fishing is new to Vanga, beginning in the late 90s when Tanzanian fishermen introduced net fishing to the community. As the trade began to take off, women like Rehema saw an opportunity to start their own fish processing operations, capturing more of the value in the locality.
Kwanza mimi nilikuwa sina hata shilingi. Kuna dadangu mwingine yuishi Tanzania, ndo akanikopesha 25,000, nikaanzia. Hiyo ndo nikanunua vitenda kazi, hiyo nikaanzia. Kazi wangu akija kama ana matatizo, atasema yeye mwenyewe, mama nimekuja nataka unikopeshe kiasi kadhaa, manake niko na shida fulani. Nikianza kazi utanikatia. Sasa mimi mwenyewe kama nitamkatia tu kidogo, alafu zingine mwenyewe namuacha, kwa sababu yategemea ile shida yenyewe na ile pesa yenyewe ameichukua kivipi. Mwezi ambao kwenye hii biashara yetu una faida zaidi, mwezi wa 6, wa 7 mpaka wa 8. Kwa sababu huwa biashara, yani madagaa hayapatikani kwa wingi, na ndio watu ni wengi sasa wanatafuta ile mali. Kwa hiyo wewe wanunua hali na wewe wapandisha bei. Ukinunua hali na wewe wauza hali. Kwa hiyo kidogo ina faida zaidi. Wanawake walioanza, tulianza wanawake wengi. Ilikuwa hizi changamoto za kudelay biashara hawajazijua. Mili leo wapata, kesho wakosa, kesho kutwa mtu amekimbia na pesa, wahangaika tena watafuta mali nyingine, waendelea. Kwa hiyo sisi tushaamua kuwa tuendelee na hizi biashara. Wale tuliobaki kama wanawake 40 bado twang'ang'ana, lakini wengine walishindwa wakaacha njiani.
Rehema is a stability entrepreneur. She wants to grow her business, but in a slow and steady way, without taking on more risk than she already faces. Her income is tied to the seasons, but also fluctuates in unpredictable ways. She finds ways to keep her business afloat, but doesn't have a source of working capital that she can rely on. Neither does she have a good source of capital to expand her business in the ways she aspires to, including adopting new and greener technology, such as efficient stoves, which save costs on firewood.
Wavuvi, wajua akienda baharini, ile siku atakao kwenda, akipata, kesho hana. Kama hakwenda siku 2 hana kitu. Naomba kama 500, kama 200 mimi huwa nawapa. Kwa hiyo lazima akienda kule baharini atanikumbuka, kwa sababu mimi ni mtu ambaye nimemsaidia. Kwa hiyo na yeye lazima anipe ili nipate kumsaidia kesho. Kama akininyima, kesho nitapata wapi mimi za kuja kumsaidia? Kikundi cha mashauzi ni cha VSLA. Sisi tuko watu 25 kwa pale. Kwa hiyo ukiwa na shida yako, waenda waelezea wanachama, kuwa mimi niko na shida fulani, naomba mkopo. Mimi yangu nilifungua, alafu nikamwachia kijana wangu ndo iwatumie. Sasa benki baba niweke nini? Mwenyewe nanunua kila, benki napeleka nini? Sina cha kupeleka. Kisema nataka kwa mshwari na pesa nachukua. Haina shida, sina shida nao, sina tatizo nao watu wa mshwari. Lakini sana mimi natumia M-Pesa kwa kutuma na kutoa. Matumizi ya M-Pesa mimi sana natumia kwa kutumiwa pesa. Wanaonipeleka mzigo wanitumia na M-Pesa.
Rehema is an example of a small business owner and a stability entrepreneur. Small firms like Rehema's are a distinct group. They seek stability through slow and steady growth in the face of a lot of ups and downs. They are a crucial source of employment, but the volatility they face means the jobs they provide are precarious. They have access to formal financial services, including banks and mobile money, but they look to informal sources for their day-to-day liquidity needs, and they still operate heavily in cash. This points to a need and an opportunity to design new products focused on providing liquidity to help businesses like Rehema's stabilize and grow.
Hapa Vanga kutoka kwanza hii biashara ya madagaa, mimi naona watu wameendelea kwa sababu mwanzo na sasa ni tofauti. Kwanza wanawake wajishughulisha, sio ile wanawake kukaa majumbani. Ushaelewa? Asubuhi watu watoka wenyewe wenda jinunulia biashara zao. Hawana ile kutegemea sana waume. Mtu ajua mwenyewe ana shida. Watoto sasa hivi wasoma, Maana ukisema muangalia baba peke yake, baba kazi ni ile ya baharini. Ataweza kusomesha mtoto kweli? Kwa hiyo watu wasaidiana, yule akipata 20, yule ana 20, mtoto yuenda shule. Sasa hii kuna maendeleo.
So that gives you a sense of what we've done in this study and the kinds of firms that we met. What I want to do in the next half hour or so is give an overview of what we've seen here in Kenya, but also a little bit from the data we've gathered from around the world. And talk to you about how we gather that data, why we gather the data, and the insights that hopefully generates. But I want to be very clear, too. I mentioned earlier being the son of a Baptist preacher, that I look American, I sound American, but I grew up in Colombia, country in South America, right on the coast. I had a lot in common with the people in Kwale that we were visiting yesterday. And I had the experience growing up of watching lots of Americans show up in Colombia and after a day, give a lecture on everything that was wrong with Colombia and all the things that Colombians needed to do to fix it. And so I'm very sensitive coming here, having watched that, to know and to be clear that that's not what today is. First, we've spent 60,000 hours listening to people in Kenya and in these other countries, and my job is to communicate what we've heard from them. But more importantly, what today isn't we have done this work and now we are done, and here is our recommendations, you all should go out and do things. When we talk about this as a launch, as Tamara mentioned, this is a launch of the conversation about better understanding what we've learned and then how we can work together to do something about that. And so what we're really hoping to get out today is not just that you listen politely, maybe a little applause at the end, but that you actually push back, that you ask questions. You ask like, well, that's interesting, but what about this? Did you look at this thing? And so you'll have access today to 2 reports, what we call the country report, and we may have changed the title at the end based on tomorrow. We have something called, what we originally called the Financial Services Brief. It's 60 pages. And so Tamara said we should probably not call it a brief at that point. But the intent of those documents is to share with you the data that we have so that you can ask questions as opposed to just providing answers. So let me walk you through some of this. So most important to understand is the Financial Diaries methodology. And the Financial Diaries methodology is a way of really getting into the details of financial lives, the choices and the approaches that people make. Those aren't my slides up there, are they? There they are. Very good. So the financial diaries methodology were originally developed for households in South Africa, in Bangladesh, and India, and gave us for the first time some real insight into how low-income households around the world actually manage their finances on a day-to-day basis. It was interesting enough that we took that to the United States, and then it has expanded around the world. FSD Kenya has done household diaries here in Kenya, as Tamara mentioned. But those were all focused on households, and a lot of micro-enterprises within those households. But when I was visiting, having some conversations with a variety of people who had done some financial diaries, I happened to get the great luck to be in Rwanda with the MasterCard Foundation, not MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, and took the time to go see the gorillas because I was in Rwanda anyway. But the place I was staying was right next to a carpentry shop. And I built furniture as a hobby in my basement, and so I was just fascinated by carpentry in the first place. So I go over and just try to meet them and watch, and I end up spending the whole day at this carpentry shop watching, and there's a big puzzle. Because this is a firm with a lot of assets. They've got 5 or 6 different machines, not the newest technology, but machines that cost a lot of money to buy. And there are 4 or 5 guys sitting around wearing blue jumpsuits, workers. And I'm watching just the way this happens, and I'm thinking, I've spent all this time thinking about microenterprise, and there are, people here working, having jobs that probably are better than trying to start up their own one-person carpentry shop. But we haven't been studying these people. And it's clear that these workers are not university graduates on their way to become government ministers, right? These are the same low-income households that we've cared about. So what's happening in these firms? How do these firms work? How do their finances work? What is it like to be a worker in one of these firms? How does that compare to being a microenterprise? And that was the idea behind doing financial diaries of small firms, is trying to answer those questions. And as we dug deeper, we see that these small firms are very, very important, but they are very, very different. The reason we know that is through the support from MasterCard and the Gates Foundation or Gideas. We were able to do this in 7 different countries, including Kenya, but also Uganda, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Colombia, and Fiji. And in each of these places, we're recruiting about 150 firms, at least 30% of them women-owned firms, to go and convince them to visit with us once a week, once every 2 weeks for a full year, and to share all of their cash flows. And I mentioned the great work for Lyft globally. Some of our field teams, the people who actually went and convinced these firms to do that, are here. Oh, yeah, that's a great idea. If you're on the field team here in Kenya, would you just please stand just for a second so we can recognize you? So I do want you to take a moment to imagine walking up to a complete stranger and saying, "Hi, would you mind telling me about all of your money for a year?" Now, when we started this process, too, one of the reasons I called out Ali for taking the bet, people thought this was crazy, is I bet you think, well, 1, nobody's going to do that in the first place, but 2, nobody would keep doing that for a year. So I want to ask, what is your guess of the level of attrition, the number of people who say yes and then drop out over the course of the year? So if you think it was about 50%, raise your hand. If you think it was about 40%, raise your hand. So how many people dropped out of the study after an issue? Because you have to do this for a full year and share all this detailed data. 20%? 10%? 5%? 2%? It was about 2%. And that speaks to one of the key things that we learned, is these firms are different and they are tired of nobody paying attention to them. They were willing to invest their time because they wanted to be heard. Now, Marita and Kate and Fiona, they had a lot to do to make that continue, but right? The firms themselves really invested in this project because they wanted to be heard. So I've mentioned what we do, visiting them. We gather all of their cash flows, but we also, at each of those visits, have a lot of qualitative questions. So we're not just looking at how much money came in and how much money went out. We're asking questions about why those cash flows happened. We're also asking questions about why cash flows didn't happen, which is a really hard thing to guess unless you're seeing those cash flows to see where things are going up and down. We're asking about their attitudes to credit. We're asking about their uses of credit. We're asking about their employees. We interview employees along the way to better understand the employees. We ask about their business practices, their management practices. We have a wide variety of things that you'll see in the country report that we learn from them. Here in Kenya, we had 3 research sites, 155 firms. Tamara mentioned this, Kisumu, Kwale, and here in Nairobi. About 30% were women-owned, but they are all small firms. I do want to clarify, none of them were small farms. They were only small firms. And we had to come up with this term, honestly. We had to invent a term because we really wanted to focus on this segment of the economy that is already employing people, that is already paying people outside the family. Whereas most of the statistics you see are for the MSME sector, which goes from 0 to 50, but depending on the country, sometimes micro means 0 to 5, sometimes it means 0 to 10, sometimes small, and everybody's using the same term, but everybody is defining things differently. But what really troubled me is from research in other countries, we know that the difference between a 0-employee firm and a 1-employee firm is vast. But most of our statistics were bundling all of those people together. And so that was the key thing we wanted to do. Let's find those firms who have already taken that step to pay somebody outside of their family for labor. Let's understand those firms. And so we couldn't call them micro, we couldn't call them small, we had to come up with our own unique word that sounds a little too much like farm. We also specialized in 3 industries: light manufacturing, agri-processing, and services. And as Tamara showed you, the majority of small firms in many places are retail, just by number. They're retail firms. We specifically excluded retail. And we specifically excluded retail because if you know anything about the retail industry, globally, the way the retail industry works is you're either very small or you're huge, right? You're either Amazon or you're a market vendor. And so the possibility for growth of adding significant employees in retail is it's quite low. Very few firms can grow to 10 or 15 employees. They're going to stay very small. So we wanted to look in this study, given that we couldn't look at everything, at some industries where it was really plausible that a firm could go from 2 to 4 to 8 to 12 employees in a reasonable amount of time. And so these were the industries that we selected. So what did we see after we gathered this data? We can look at it on an annual basis. So what this chart shows you is on the left, their revenues. So you see they go from all the way almost 600,000 Kenyan shillings a month to almost 0. But most of them are in this range between about 50 to 250,000 Kenyan shillings per month in terms of income. Their expenses, again, most of them are in that 25 to 100,000. And the operating margin, I want to be clear that we don't use the word profit because profit would mean subtracting every cost, amortizing their assets and all sorts of things that are really, really hard to do in these environments. So operating margin is simply revenues minus expenses and does not include anything that the owner takes for their own household. So that is in that operating margin. That operating margin is the sum total of what the owner has to support their household and to reinvest in their business. And that is about 25 to 100,000 Kenyan shillings per month for the firms. However, if you know if you've seen some box and whiskers charts, you'll know that what that also means is that the vast majority of the firms were on the lower end of that scale. So you see that about 82 of the 155 firms had less than 100,000 Kenyan shillings per month in revenue. We also, of course, we are called the Financial Access Initiative. We're partnered with Financial Sector Deepening Kenya. So a key question is, what kind of financial services do people use? And this is part of the beauty of the Financial Diaries methodology, is you don't just have to get to ask, like, what accounts do you have? you get to see how they use those accounts as they go. And so this chart, what it shows you is to the far right is, did the firm say they have that kind of account for their firm? I'll be very clear too. This is it's not necessarily registered as a business account, but it's conceived of by them as this is an account just for my business. So, 80% of them have bank accounts. But then the next dot over you see is how many of them use that account, that we recorded a cash flow into or out of that account at least once during the study, and you see that drops to almost 60%. And then we look at how many firms use that account for at least 25% of the value of their cash flows, and you see it drops all the way down to almost 20% on the bank accounts. So these firms are part of the formal financial system by and large, but there's still a long way for them to go to be fully integrated in. And many of them are using cash. You can see 70% of them are using cash for more than 25% of the value of their transactions. But of course, the big question that we have here is understanding, where are the firms going? And trying to measure whether a firm is growing in a situation like this is quite difficult. Because as you'll see a little bit later, we see a lot of volatility month to month in how much revenue they have. So if you just take the first month of the study and the last month of the study and try and compare those as a growth metric, you have no idea whether you're just measuring, well, the first month was really good and the last month was really bad, and it looks like the firm is way on the way down, but it could in fact be on the way up. It's just a factor of those particular months. So what we do is we look at the slope of a line that gets closest to the average across those months to measure whether they're growing or not. And you can see the vast majority of the firms were essentially pretty close to no change. So there are plenty of firms that grew a little, a larger number of firms that were a little bit smaller at the end of the year. But the thing I want to make sure that people understand, though, is this does not mean the firms are stagnant. They're not staying in one place. What we see overall is an incredible amount of dynamism. The firms are working really, really hard. They're investing daily. They're struggling daily. They're working hard daily. They have aspirations. They're going places. They're not just sitting there accepting. But the situation is that that effort doesn't translate into forward, upward motion. So now I want to get into, okay, so what does all this mean? What are our 4 key takeaways from the study here in Kenya, and also adding in some of the global data as we understand these firms? And then at the end, we're going to get to what we think is the start of a conversation about 4 recommendations of what do we do about these key takeaways. And the first is, as I've referenced a couple of times, that these are firms that have been invisible, but they are super meaningful. So just to give you a bit of historical perspective, in the 50s and 60s, our idea of economic development was we need to develop the big state-owned enterprise that's a champion for the country, is going to compete in international markets, and is going to be a huge corporation manufacturing things, replacing all those imports, and then that's going to trickle down. And I've been told in Kenya this was a very common sight for those sorts of CEOs of those sorts of companies driving around Nairobi in cars like this. So that's the imagery there, is that what we need to do is we need to focus on the big, and then the benefits will trickle down and the economy will develop. By the 70s, it became pretty clear that that was not working. Not only were those big state-owned enterprises not really growing and producing a lot of profits, they were actually draining profits from the country, but nothing was trickling down. It was all staying in the Mercedes. So starting in the 70s, there started to be this idea, well, we need to go to the bottom. We need to go to the poor. We need to go all the way to the bottom. So we're going to go from the top all the way to the bottom. And we had the 70s and 80s, the microcredit revolution and the focus on the base of the pyramid. But I began my career in this space trying to understand, okay, so what's happening with microcredit? How are people using it? We have this great idea that people are going to take a loan, they're going to start a business, they're going to lift them and then sell their families out of poverty. By the 90s, early 2000s, it was becoming very clear that that wasn't happening. These firms were not growing. And so around that time, some economists and theorists at the World Bank said, well, the problem where we're not seeing development is not because there's too much focus on the top or there's too much focus on the bottom and the bottom's not growing. It's that there's a missing middle, that there are no mid-sized firms. Firms are either big or they're micro. And so there was a lot of work done for a few years on this whole concept, like, why is there a missing middle? And then Ben Olkin in economics at MIT went deep into data and said, there is no missing middle. You just weren't counting them. The fact is that these firms in the middle were invisible. It's not that they weren't there. And there are firms like the metal workers who are building wheelbarrows. There are firms like the carpenters who are employing 5 or 6 people. There are firms like the shoemakers and the couch makers that we've talked about. So those firms were there. We just weren't looking and we weren't paying attention at this invisible middle. This other idea that we had, though, as we were thinking about how do we help development, help low-income households, was that what we really needed to do is find and support firms in their growth. And I'm going to share with you some conceptual ideas of the way to think about it and the way I think we need to start thinking about small firms. So this is just a little video of what I think is a good representation of how we've thought about how we should be helping micro and small firms. We're looking for people to do this. And, you know, I don't know about you, I wouldn't want to be on that boat. And it turns out that a lot of small firms don't want to be on that boat either, right? Their firm is the primary support for their household. It's a big part of supporting their workers. They're not going to put that jet engine in a boat because they think they're going to crash. And they're probably right. But so much of what we've done is like, well, we invest a little bit in these firms and they're going to take off and we're going to grow, and then we get disappointed when they don't do that. And part of the issue is the firms don't want that. Why don't they want that? Because the more accurate representation, if I can get this to, this is what it's like being a small firm owner. It's not a boat with a jet engine on a flat water. It's that. And I referenced earlier that the firms were dynamic. They are dynamic. But the dynamic is up and down the waves. And it's not making progress. And that is a key challenge that we need to understand about these firms, is that their primary goal is seeking stability. Now, I say primary here because I want to make a big contrast that even relatively recently in the microfinance literature, there's been this idea that there are 2 kinds of firms, microfirms. There are gung-ho entrepreneurs and there are reluctant entrepreneurs. And that a vast part of the people in this space aren't growing because they don't want to grow. And that is absolutely not what we see. We see the firms have growth aspirations, specifically in the small firm segment, where these are people who have already taken a considerable risk. They've saved for years to buy the equipment that they have, and they have equipment, they have assets, they have locations. They've taken the risk of hiring someone to operate these expensive assets that they have. They've stepped out with a great deal of risk, but they've already stepped out into enough risk. They don't want to step out into more risk. They want growth that yields less volatility, less of that up and down. Now, I think it's helpful to see the boat, but it's also helpful to see the data. This is just one firm in the Kenya Diaries. And you see, I'm colorblind, so I have no idea what the colors are, but there's one line up there that's revenue, and the other line is expense. And there's a color code, so maybe you can tell. But, I mean, how do you make long-term plans when you live on that line? Of course, these firms are seeking stability. Of course, they're looking for ways to grow, but grow slow and steady, and reduce the amounts of ups and downs. And I think about all of the work that's done supposedly to teach small firm owners how to run businesses. And I can't imagine very many people who have degrees from Harvard Business School could work in that environment and be successful, right? That if you can even survive that, you've got way more skills than most business managers in the world. Now, before I move on this slide, I do want to point out that we have a measure of the amount of up and downs that firms have. This firm is called a coefficient of variation. It measures volatility. The variation measures the volatility. It's just a way of figuring out how much up and down and comparing two firms. The coefficient of variation of this firm is 0.27. That's about half of what the average firm's was. So you look at this and you think, oh my gosh, what volatility? Most firms had a lot more than that. So when we look at that CV here, you'll also see that the firms are trying to match their expenses to their revenues and doing it on a monthly basis. But they don't have the tools to do it. And so the CV, what you see on the right, of their operating margin is significantly larger than the volatility of their revenues. What I want you to take away from that is simply to understand there's a gap here, that they don't have the tools to measure the volatility that they face. And that translates into up and down margins all over the place. And so I mentioned this idea of the binary. There are people who want to grow and there are people who don't want to grow. We asked all the firms about their aspirations. And we didn't tell them you only have to pick one. And the biggest group, 61% of them, told us that their aspirations for the business were both growth and profit and in stability. They wanted to grow employees, they wanted to grow revenues, they wanted to grow profit, but they wanted stability. And so that's where we come up with this term, stability entrepreneur. And taking a step back, the original definition of entrepreneur, today we often use entrepreneur for anybody who owns a business. But the original idea of the entrepreneur is a person who starts a business who consciously takes on risk in the hope of return. And I use that term here very advisedly. These are people, these owners, have stepped out with a lot of risk. They've taken it on and they want to grow. But they want to grow in a way that helps them stabilize. As we see this pattern emerging and we're visiting firms, I talked to a couple of firms here in Kenya on a visit. And it really struck me, this idea. And so I'm starting to ask them about their growth and stability goals. And one woman here in Nairobi who makes couches, I'm starting to ask her, does she want to grow? And she yes, I'm here because I want to grow. And like, what does growth mean to you? And before I'd even introduced the concept, she responded, growth is stability. I hadn't said the word stability yet. Another firm out on the coast, I asked, what does growth mean? And he said, growth means I get to be here 50 years from now. And the understanding that you can't be stagnant. You have to be changing, you have to be growing, you have to be doing things. But that is what enables you to stick around. So what do they need to stick around? Again, I referenced sort of the jet engine and the idea. Here's a slightly different visual that you might appreciate, is that a lot of our programs are designed around the idea of what the firms need is another machine. They need a productive asset. But these firms, like I said, they have assets. They don't need another engine on the boat. The problem is they don't have gas for the engines they already have. But it's understandable. Like many of you are here from financial services organizations. I am deeply sympathetic to the challenge of being a bank lending for working capital instead of an asset. It's much, much easier to lend for assets. Right? Assets are predictable. You can sort of model what the returns on them should be. You get certain usage rates, and you get certain, you kind of know, you can sort of plot that out. And of course, if the borrower doesn't pay, you have something to go take back, right? If you start lending for petrol, it's gone, right? They don't pay, you're not getting anything back. That's a hard environment to figure out how to lend into, how to understand risk. But that is what the firms need. They need to be able to match those cash flows to overcome that volatility. To reach stability, they need to be able to smooth those ups and downs. And to do that, they need working capital and liquidity. When we ask the firms themselves, like, how do you manage the risks that you face? You'll see the biggest thing that they say is they keep funds aside. Now think back to that operating margin that we talked about, what their operating margins are. It's about 25 to 100,000 Kenyan shillings a month. And then you need to keep some of that aside to balance your risk. There's just not that much left to invest in the business. So you have to be very judicious. You see, the second most common thing is they pursue strategies that reduce risk. Right? If we want firms to fulfill their growth aspirations, we need to give them the tools to manage risk that aren't just avoiding risk. We need to give them tools to manage that risk. But here's the interesting thing, particularly in this, is that you would think, oh, if you have a lot of working capital liquidity problems, then you probably need loans to manage that up and down. But when we ask the firms about whether they need loans, you can see over here, I rarely, and I only occasionally, that 85% of the firms basically say, loans, I'm not interested. So if they tell us that they have a problem, that financial access is a barrier, that financial services are a barrier to their goals, but they never need loans, what does that mean? What it tells us is they don't want the loans that are available in the market. The loans that are in the market don't meet the need that they have. So it's not that they don't need capital, that they don't need to borrow, it's that they don't need the loans that are available to them. And the challenge that we have is how do we develop loan products that actually work for the firm owners so that that chart reverses. I use loans because it helps me take advantage of opportunities. It helps me manage those ups and downs. So when we do ask the firms, like, when you use loans, and we do see a good amount of loans in the sample, when you ask them what they need loans for, like, what do they tell us? You see all those boxes. Those are all working capital uses of loans. And you'll see make an investment is up there at 27%. But we also look into those cash flows to see examples of when firms are spending large amounts, the kinds of amounts that would look like an investment. Anybody have a guess of what they're spending on when they spend their biggest amounts at any particular time? You can be interactive. Take a guess. What kinds of things are they buying when they use a large lump sum to buy? Not a machine. Raw materials, stock. Right? So they even conceive of, we think that investment should be interpreted as raw materials too. Right? Because for them, raw materials are an investment in the ability to respond when an opportunity comes along. We hear from firms over and over again this dance, this race that they have to do when an order comes in, of scraping together the capital to have the raw materials in order to fulfill the order before the customer goes somewhere else. Right? So having stock on hand means that I can say yes when that order comes in. And I can profit from it. I can take advantage of that opportunity. Now, we also see that they like investing in raw materials because if things go wrong, that opportunity doesn't come along, I can still sell the raw materials. And I can sell it a lot easier than I can sell an asset. And so it serves this dual purpose of protecting them from risk. It's a risk-averse strategy to invest in raw materials because it allows you to convert it back into cash if you need to. But for those of you who have worked in places, ideas like this, you would think immediately, well, the answer to this kind of problem is supply chain finance. How is it that we move money from the people who have it to the people who need it? And who has money? Often the people the next step up in the chain. But one of the things that's really fascinating is despite how liquidity constrained these firms are, they're giving credit to customers as much as they're getting credit from suppliers. So, in the original Portfolios of the Poor research, one of the big insights was how much more was happening in the informal sector than we realized. And then we have these measures of informal finance. One of my big realizations is we still way undercounting the amount of informal credit in the economy because so much of it is happening through these small firms, allowing their customers to pay later, selling to their customers on credit. But think about the amplification effect. If we can increase the liquidity of these firms, they can provide more liquidity to their customers. Those customers can drive the economy. Like there is such a possibility here of an amplifier effect if we fix some of these liquidity, provide them better access to working capital. And so my last little video here, continuing on our somewhat nautical theme, is what's happening with the workers. And this is a big part of why we wanted to study these firms. It's not just the small firm owners, but the workers in these firms in low-income communities who we believed were really struggling, but we needed to understand better. So this is a live view, shall we say, of a small firm going through volatility. And there go the workers. Right? The firms themselves don't have the tools to manage volatility. The only tool they have to manage volatility is to push it on down to the workers. So what does that look like? If you look at ILO statistics, you'll see that in a lot of the countries that we're studying, they estimate that 50 to 80% of the jobs in the economy are in small firms like this. But their data only allows them to say, like, a count of jobs by going to the household and saying, do you have a job? What kind of firm is it? What we are able to see with the financial diaries is what those jobs actually look like. And those jobs are very, very volatile in two ways. One, they're volatile in the amount that any worker earns in any particular week or month goes up and down a lot. But the existence of the job also varies a lot. So this is, for instance, another one of our firms in Kenya. You see, they pay 4 different employees over the course of the study. But only one of those employees gets paid for 10 months. It's easy to miss. There's one employee here who only works in 1 month of the study. And then another employee who works for 3 months, and then the job goes away, and then they hire somebody else. So this firm employed 4 people. For only 1 month did they employ 3 people. And then other months they employ 2 people, but they're different people. The workers are turning over. And this is important for 2 reasons, and I want to relate it back to the small firms as well. It's important because the employees are struggling to manage the volatility. The firms aren't providing the stability that the employees need. But you also get this sort of cyclical problem. So talking to a carpenter, one of the few carpenters who didn't grow up being a carpenter, he actually had a job at a hotel, but knew that his future was running a business. So he tried to start the carpentry firm before he left his hotel job by hiring someone to run the carpentry firm. And he discovered that that person was, we say in the US, skimming. Some of the stock, some of the money was disappearing before it got back to him. So he had to find another worker. That guy was skimming more than the first guy. And so he had to find another worker. And that still didn't work out. So he finally had to quit his hotel job to be there to watch, to make sure that the workers weren't stealing. But I don't want to put this in any way as a character defect or something like that, or something unique to Kenya. This is all over. Any small firm owner wants to know that their own employees are trustworthy. To know that their employees are trustworthy, you have to observe them for some measure of time. They're a stranger. This is someone you don't know who's come into your firm. So you've got to watch them. And over time, you develop, okay, this is a good employee. This is a person who I can trust. This person knows what they're doing. And you, as a firm owner, can go do other things. This is the power of being in a company, is that not everybody does the same thing. You can sort of diversify, and different people take different jobs. But the situation that we see happening is you watch a worker long enough and you can trust them, but then you don't have enough business, so that person has to leave. So then you have to bring in another stranger, and then you got to watch him to see if you can trust him. And by the time you realize you can trust him, he has to leave, and you go a couple months and you have to hire another person. And so the firm owners spend so much of their time just observing employees, learning if they can trust them, that they can't devote their time to even more valuable things like growth, like managing volatility. But because they can't do that, then their revenues continue to be so volatile that they can't keep any employees long enough to learn to trust them. And so we get this go round and round of this challenge of these fragile jobs. But it's also, I'm going to skip ahead here so we can get to some other things. It's also really important for these employees because these employees are poor. We survey an employee at each of the firms, and we ask them questions about their financial lives. And we see that 65% of them say that their household runs out of necessary items. They run out of cash or necessary items on a monthly basis. A quarter of them say that one of the children in their household doesn't get enough to eat because there's not enough income coming in, right? These employees need help in their households. And this is a channel, the small firms are a channel to help them because most of them, we talked about the small firms being different. The employees are different too. So when I came into the study, I imagined that a lot of these employees were people who are either opening their own microenterprise with a microcredit loan or shifting into work. But what we found in Kenya and across countries is that by and large, these are distinct audiences, distinct groups. The people who work for small firms, when they lose the job at the small firm, they go work for another small firm. They don't start their own microenterprise. So about 70% of them report self-employment, microenterprise as the alternative, but about more than 80% of them say, no, what I do is I work in small firms, and I go from firm to firm. So that's a lot. And like I said, this is the start of a conversation. But here I want to get to, so what do we do about any of this? And these are our initial thoughts that we're hoping today, in the form of the workshops later, to really build on these ideas, to hear your reactions, to hear your ideas. How do we do something to help these small firms? And our first recommendation is we do need sustained attention on this distinct group of firms. They are different. They employ much better business practices than most microenterprises. They are at a higher level of capital. They are paying people. They are finding ways. And they are resilient. They are not going away. Most of the firms in the study have been there for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. They're not failing. They're staying in this market. We need to understand them if we're going to understand the economy and the situations of their workers. Here, Kenya has the great advantage of already having the MSE tracker and the FinAccess surveys. So Kenya is a step ahead of many places around the world and already starting to devote some resources. But there's more. And I can tell you, we spent a year with these firms. I still have a lot of questions. I would love to keep following a number of these firms. I would love to ask some different questions that have been uncovered. There's a lot more to do here, and we can only do it by sustained attention specifically to small firms. Second, hearkening back to those ideas of we design programs with the idea that what the firm needs is another engine, and what they need is gasoline. We design programs like, we just need to find the small firm that wants the jet engine and let them go, right? We do need to change our focus. The biggest bulk of these entrepreneurs are stability entrepreneurs, but our programs, our training programs, our efforts, our policies are not designed around helping people achieve stability and manage volatility and risk. We need to change the focus of what we're trying to do to support the firms, to support them in their actual goals, not what we wish their goals could be if the world was different. Third, we need to develop the working capital tools to enable them to manage their liquidity and be able to take advantage of opportunity. And as I mentioned, this is a really tough nut to crack. I'm particularly excited about the infrastructure Kenya has between leading-edge fintechs and digital financial services and a network of financial services providers to have the tools to be able to innovate in this place. Kenya has already seen a lot of world-leading innovation in financial services. But this is a new frontier, and it's important, and it's tough. And I think it's only going to work from partnerships, and particularly partnerships that bring in the suppliers. So if we think about lending, right, one of the big questions in lending is how do we tell who is going to repay? Because everybody says they're going to repay. How do you tell who is going to repay? And there's already somebody in all of these markets who knows who the best businesses, most reliable businesses are. They're suppliers. But of course, the suppliers are liquidity constrained and they're not lenders. They don't want to make loans. So how do we bring things like suppliers and all of the knowledge they have into the financial services ecosystem, partnered with banks and fintechs, to be able to provide more liquidity using the knowledge that's already there. When I said this in Quelle just on Monday, one of the people said, well, you know, the other people who know who the good businesses are the customers. Why aren't you talking to the customers? And I'm like, absolutely. Customers know who the most reliable vendors are too. How do we extract the knowledge from them? And finally, we really do need to be concerned about the employees of these firms, not just the firms. I mentioned a moment ago that the firms are passing the volatility on to their employees because they have no other tools, and that's absolutely true. But I also don't think we can just make a leap and say, well, if we stabilize the firms, they're going to pass all of the stability on to their workers too, right? That's just not the way the world works. So at the same time as we're helping the firms, we need to be thinking about how do we directly support the workers so the benefits of stability do accrue to them as well. We can't punish the firms. They're already taking plenty of punishment. But we have to way to sort of come alongside them and support the employees directly. So, that is my preaching done for the day. I hope it was interesting and useful. And as I said, there's so much more data in the reports. And we're really hopeful that you'll dig into those and be with us for the policy workshop this afternoon to help us really dig in and think through these things and identify what the opportunities are and really start this conversation in a positive direction so that we can support small firms in Kenya and through them the overall economy, the development of the country, and people living at low incomes here in Kenya. James.
Thank you very much, Tim. There's a reason they chose me to be the MC, is that for many years before I was the Chief Program Officer, I was the head of growth at FSD Kenya and very concerned about small businesses. And so I have really a lot of questions about all this. I know everybody else does, but I'd ask you to hold on to your horses. There will be a chance to get them off your chest shortly. Let me ask Hilary Miller-Wise to come up and make remarks, short remarks, on behalf of the Gates Foundation. I don't want to say short because but we are running a bit behind schedule, so if we can try and catch up. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, James. Just great thanks again to the FSDK team, to the NYU team, and one group that I think was not mentioned was LIFT. And I was joking with a colleague that I think that's your name because you do the heavy lifting, a lot of the research on the ground. So congratulations to all of you for all this work. Secondly, obviously the MasterCard commercial, the Center for Inclusive Growth, Argidius, and the Aspen Network. I also want to recognize we have delegations from Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Uganda here. So welcome to all of you, and very excited to learn about that data as well. I also wanted to call out Maria May on our team, who really had the vision and brought this to light with all of the partners. She probably has not mentioned that not everyone was convinced initially that this was something that was really important to do. This happened before I joined. And immediately when she told me about it, it was just such a no-brainer to me that we would have this data. So thank you to her for that vision. If we believe that data is the new gold, I feel like we've hit the jackpot today. And as you get into more of the data, you'll realize what I'm talking about. I do want to just riff a little bit on, for a minute, and I will be short, I promise, on what Tim was saying about him being the son of a preacher. I am the daughter of a journalist, and what that means is I was raised to ask questions. In fact, every day before my two boys go to school, I say to them, ask good questions. And they say, okay, Mom. But I think the inquiry and the sort of continuing to push on what does this data mean and how does it inform what we do is really critical. one of the things that Tim mentioned was, and I want to kind of bring us back to Rehema, who in Kenya we would call her the Mama Samaki. She's a fish mama. I want to bring it back to her, to Tamara's point. We always have to ground this data in the people that we want to support. And in her case, the fact that she wants stability speaks to the fact that her life is incredibly vulnerable. And that chart, with the lines up and down, when you think about what that actually means day to day in her life and the choices that she has to make around, do her children eat that day? Does she send her kids to school? This kind of thing. Those are the daily choices that Rehema is making. And so when Tim talks about, one of the reasons that someone like Rehema is struggling is we have the wrong products in the market. If we talk about the types of credit that's in the market, I could not agree more with Tim on that point. But I think what we have to ask is why? Why is that, right? I'm old, and I've been doing this work for quite some time. And in the late 90s, we were doing product development. And yet still, we're not seeing the right products in the market. And to me, what that speaks to is that there are structural issues that we have to solve for. And so at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we're really asking ourselves, what has to change in the system, at a system level? What has to change in terms of incentives in the market for financial institutions to want to serve this market and to provide them with the loans? I don't think that any of the people in the room who are financial service providers would say, we want the wrong products in the market. It's not intentional. It's that there are structural barriers that prevent financial institutions from actually designing products that work for these customers. And so what can we do, all of us collectively, to change that and to drive that structural change? So as a good daughter of a journalist, I would say continue to ask questions and continue to push us, right? Push our thinking on how to do this. If we had the answer, we would have done it already. So we really rely on you to help us think through what are some different ways. How can we not be doing the same things that may not be working? And how can we be really innovative in trying to change these systems and these structures to work for Rehema? With that, I thank you, and I look forward to engaging with you in the afternoon.
Thank you very much. Before everybody starts thinking that this afternoon is a really long way away, the workshops will start at around 11 and go to 12:30 or 1. So there's a lot of afternoon left for everybody. Just to say that Hilary Miller-Wise is the Deputy Director, Usage Financial Services for the Poor at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Next we welcome Dr. Habil Olaka, speaking to us remotely. Do we have Habil? Great. So Dr. Habil Olaka is the CEO of Kenya Bankers Association, and he's agreed to join us today.
Yeah, thank you very much, MC. And let me start by first recognizing the presence of the Cabinet Secretary for Ministry of Cooperatives, Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises, Honorable Simon Chelugui. Let me also recognize the speaker who has just spoken before me, from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Hilary Miller-Wise. I'd also recognize the country manager for East Africa for MasterCard, Sheria Ali. And I'd also recognize the CEO of FSD Kenya, Tamara Cook. And I'll also recognize all the distinguished guests that have attended this session today. And in a purely Kenyan style, I'll align myself to all the protocols that have been observed. So on behalf of the Kenya Bankers Association, and indeed the banking industry, I would like to express my pleasure in participating in the launch of the FSD Kenya Small Farms Diaries. From the outset, I would like to commend FSD Kenya for this important addition to the ongoing cross-sector interventions and strategies towards leveraging on research-based solutions aimed at enhancing the capacity of small enterprises to achieve their full potential in the economy. Notably, these diaries come at a time when many small businesses continue to recover from the disruptive ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic. I have no doubt that the insights highlighted in the report will be instructive in informing practical policy interventions that will enable SMEs to flourish. Indeed, the banking sector in Kenya recognizes SMEs as an important driver of sustainable economic growth. This recognition is based on the fact that SMEs make a direct contribution of about 30% of the total value added to the economy. This points to the fact that SMEs are a beacon of resilience that cannot be ignored, providing critical support to both household and enterprise stability. As an industry, therefore, it's our firm conviction that optimizing the small enterprises' participation in the economy will continue to play a central role towards creating more jobs and expanding the gross domestic product in line with the government's economic development agenda. In this regard, the banking industry commits to continue enhancing the operational capacity of SMEs in the economy, enabling them to access affordable and sustainable cash flow streams. This focus is well aligned with the banking sector strategic plan for the period 2019-2023, which seeks to leverage on digitization to reduce the cost of credit towards facilitating further access to liquidity for the vulnerable sectors in the economy, such as the SMEs. In line with the industry's strategic objectives, we continue to invest in research with an aim to create more responsive lending products that resonate with the unique needs of small enterprises in the economy. In these efforts, the industry recognizes the importance of capacity building in de-risking the businesses by catalyzing their transition to formal enterprises. To this end, the industry continues to coordinate a capacity building program called Inuka Enterprise Development Program. The program seeks to de-risk small businesses, enhancing their capacity to access formal credit in the market. In this regard, it's encouraging that the program has so far reached more than 60,000 enterprises since inception, continuing to complement a wide range of initiatives aimed at supporting enterprise growth in the economy. I'm pleased to note that FSD Kenya's Small Farm Diaries traces the financial operations of 155 small businesses in Kenya between October 2021 and November 2022. It's important to note that the period under review covers an important stage for the SME sector here in Kenya, as it coincides with what can be considered as the post-COVID-19 recovery period. As part of a global research initiative active in 7 countries that include Colombia, Nigeria, Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya, Indonesia, and Fiji, the research scope extends the scope of understanding on SMEs. I firmly believe that this focus will greatly contribute to understanding the contribution of low-income small farms in poverty reduction, including the barriers that limit their optimal contribution to local economies. For me, the most salient takeaway from the diaries is the need to scale up formalization of the SME sector. From the survey, it's evident that there is need to devote more attention to customized credit solutions that align to the needs of the SME sector towards creating cash flow stability. These efforts will help contain the disruptive tendency of businesses in this important sector to continuous oscillation between stability and instability. Acknowledging the importance of financial literacy, The Kenya Bankers Association has partnered with the Central Bank of Kenya and other stakeholders within the financial services sector to coordinate a sensitization campaign that will seek to inculcate a savings culture in the economy. Through the campaign, to be launched in June, we hope to strengthen the capacity of both individuals and enterprises to build savings as a pathway to cash flow stability and access to credit. In addition, the industry through KBA continues to work closely with the National Treasury to further the uptake of the SME Credit Guarantee Scheme, which is an important facilitator in promoting credit access for enterprises in the economy, focusing on the SME sector. This scheme is a welcome de-risking fund that aims to deepen access to credit for enterprises across the economy. Going forward, we are ready and willing as an industry to forge more partnerships with the public sector in enhancing the performance of the SME sector. We are firmly persuaded about the interdependence between the success of the banking sector and the resilience of small businesses in the economy. Let me stop here and hand over the program back to the MC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Habil. And so there's some slight changes to the program. Don't get alarmed. I'll ask Tamara to come up and lead us through the next few sessions.
Thank you, James. I want you all to picture that chart that Tim showed with all the variability up and down. Whenever you have someone, a chief guest from the government of Kenya, that is the variability that you need to expect. The CS really wanted to be with us and really blesses this research and more importantly, the beginning of this conversation that's going to be applied. But he got called into an emergency cabinet meeting, and that takes precedence, as you can imagine. He's also asked us to share with you that one of the things that he's really excited about that's going to be happening next week is the Madaraka Day celebrations are going to focus on micro, small, and medium enterprises. And so that is great to see the government's commitment to that. So what we're going to do is something a little different, and I know you guys can roll with it. If these small firms can roll with it, you can too. Can I ask Kate, Marita, Pacho, and Salome to join me on the stage? So these are some of the supervisors and researchers who made all this possible. And Tim, I'm going to ask you to come up as well. Great. So what we're going to do, and as I said, I've had the privilege of getting to visit firms with some of them, but you didn't. And so what we'd love to do, and actually, if the team could give us a few more microphones, that would be amazing. Otherwise, we'll flex and figure it out. What I'd like to do is ask each of you to think of a story from either one of the firms that you visited, one of the challenges you had in collecting it, but something that will give all of us in this room a little bit more of a flavor of what it was like to do this research. Kate, I'd love to start with you. Can you tell us a story? And I know Kate's a great storyteller, and for those of you who don't know, she was part of the original Kenya Financial Household Diaries. So, they didn't know they were doing this, so they're also rolling with the punches. So let's hear the great stories that are going to be off the cuff.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity, Tamara. I think I was the field manager, so I got to interact with almost all the respondents in Nairobi, Kwale, and Kisumu. And I have a lot of interesting stories to share, but there's one probably that I'll just talk about briefly. We have women in Kisumu doing fish processing, and these are not the ones that are dealing with fish per se, but they are dealing with the other leftovers of the fish, like the bones and the skin and the shells. So we had an opportunity to interview 2 such women, And one of the women that we talked to had, that I found interesting, had a family of 11. That is her, her husband, and about 9 children or more. So that was a huge family that I found to be the first challenge she faced for her business to prosper, because all her income was going to the family. All those kids were in school. Some of them had dropped out, of course, but she has one in college. She had several in primary school and high school. So most of her income was going to paying school fees. And her spouse was at some point not working. He was a casual laborer, and I think with the impact of COVID, there are some construction works that were not going on. So he was not getting much of the jobs that he normally would get. And then now it was up to this lady to make sure that the husband also is taken care of. And I found it interesting that she had to take a loan with Watu, these guys that give motorbike loans for the husband to be able to support in providing for the family. So that is another risk she faced, that the husband could not maybe meet the agreement, whereby he is the one who was supposed to repay the loan by paying some amount every day to the microfinance. So that is a risk that she faced in her business, because then she's the one who took the loan in her name. She would come in to take over the payment, which I think at one point she made 2 or 3 payments. So this is someone who is struggling to provide for the family and is also struggling for her business to pick up. The other challenge that she was facing now outside her family, again, also to mention that she had also to diversify her income in a way, though it was not for her, but one of the kids was a dropout that had that she bought for a trolley, where the kid now could sell boiled eggs and smokies. I know those of us here, we know what that means. So that, of course, was another way of helping get more income into the household. But that also had its own challenges, because she was not the one managing it. It was under the child, so she wasn't getting most out of it. So for her, every day she was struggling to make some money, but she was also facing the challenge of employees, because they would share employees in that area, because that kind of business is done in a certain place where several other people are doing a similar business. So you don't have employees of your own. So the other challenge you'll face is that today you might not have someone to work with because they've gone to work with someone else, and then you'll have to do all that work on your own, or sometimes your own employee also starts a similar business and starts doing the same thing that you're doing. So the competition was very high at that place. But one thing I learned is that they would also have customers from outside Kisumu, which is something I think that most businesses are trying to do. They're trying to diversify where they sell their products. So you're not just relying on the walk-ins, you're not just relying on people within that location. You are also trying to reach out to larger markets outside your area of operation. So she will also send staff as far as Kitale
Kate,
from Kisumu.
remember a short story?
Okay, so she'll send her products outside, like different other places, which I think if that is cultivated, if she does her marketing well, she's able to make her business grow in that way by expanding the number of customers that she can reach to, and also to be able to beat the competition around her. Thank you.
Thank you. Since Kate chose a Kisumu story and she can choose from all 3, I'll give you, Pacho, another minute to think about which story you're going to tell. Let's go to Marita, who is in Kwale.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Marita Umbeto was working in Kwale. So the lady who was featured was from Kwale in Vanga. So Rehema is a special respondent to me because she's semi-literate. She never she never had formal education, but she can read and write. She can speak Swahili, and she understands a little English. So basically, Rehema was someone who was willing to take part in the study. So from the beginning, she's one of the members who welcomed us to the village, showed us around, encouraged other women to take part in the study, which is very special to her and made our work much easier. So Rehema was navigating between Tanzania and Kenyan markets because there was competition from the Kenyan market. Vanga is by the border. So there are Tanzanian traders who could come because the Kenyan shilling is better performing than the Tanzanian shillings. So when they come with sardines from Tanzania, they could sell in Kenya, have their margins because of the exchange rates, and go back to Tanzania. So those are the challenges that she's been navigating, but she's a strong woman. She tries her best to keep her business afloat, despite all the challenges that she's going through. So in everything, she has tried to source for new markets. She has customers from Congo oftenly. So it's a point of these markets, how are they going to access them? How is she going to make her business more stable? The point that she doesn't have formal education, you can't put her in a classroom. You need to put something that is easy for her to understand. Don't tell her we need these cash flows and all this. She doesn't need to see charts. She needs to see something that is workable and is simple for her to understand and keep her business going. And I think she can employ many more people in her community and around Vanga.
Great, thanks. Salome, you want to share from Nairobi?
Good morning, everyone. Interestingly, my colleagues have shared stories about women, and I have a story about a lady. It's not that we didn't have men in the study, we did. So allow me to just give a brief on the lady and then maybe a man. So there's a lady we interviewed in Nairobi. She's in honey processing. So it's interesting, her story is interesting because she was able to start this business after identifying a need. She says she lived near the Beekeeping Institute, so she was able to see the number of customers who go to the institute, and some of them do not get the products they need. So that's how she identified that she needed to start her business in honey processing. So she started her business after a project she was working on ended, and she was able to pick it up well. Of course, there are challenges along the business. And something that stands out is that during the COVID-19 pandemic, most of the businesses were experiencing losses, or they didn't have enough customers. So she was in honey processing business, and at that time, people were looking at solutions, maybe I'd say none of the traditional solutions to improving their health. So honey was one of the alternatives that people were going to. So she's in honey processing, and she has also diversified to have other things, like we have propolis. So people now were sourcing the propolis and the honey from her, as well as, of course, from other enterprises near her area. And that is the time she says that she was able to make the most out of the business. So as much as COVID-19 affected the businesses negatively, it was a rise or a boost for her business at that point. Then we have a male respondent who worked in poultry business.
We'll come back to him. Let's hear from Pacho from Kisumu.
Good morning. My name is Nicholas Pacho, and I was the field coordinator in Kisumu. Now, I have a story about a gentleman in Kisumu. He started off as a fisherman. Initially, he comes from a fisherfolk community, and so fish is all he knows. Right now, he's 27 years old, and when he started off as a fisherman, he figured that he was not making enough income from that activity, and he sort of moved through the ranks to becoming a fishmonger. Again, as a fishmonger, he realized that at the community market, fish would easily go bad, and most people would lose their fish because they would go bad. So he managed to access credit from a financial institution and set up a fish freezing, a fish freezer. And from that enterprise, he could make extra income for other people in the community or in the market to utilize his fish freezing facility, as he also did fish mongering on the side. So I see that as a very resilient sort of MSME business. And yeah, I really enjoyed the ingenuity of the man. He had to take financial literacy classes at some point just to get a proper understanding of how best to manage his business. And it sticks with me that he was a very determined gentleman. Thank you.
And I've seen those fish freezers. They're always full. Do we have any questions from the audience, either for the researchers and actually for all those private sector players in the room? These are the kind of researchers you should be hiring if you really want to understand what's happening qua ground. Just a little advertisement for your services now that this research is over. Or any questions for Tim and the presentation that he made? Go ahead.
Thank you. This is fantastic, so really appreciate the opportunity to listen and learn. This is a question for all of you, what you've seen anecdotally, but also, Tim, what the research says in terms of understanding the power and the fragility of the business on the entrepreneur's household. And do we have any data that tells us what it means to be a small firm owner and how it helps or where it may be sort of in comparison creating more risk for their household? Because when we think about financial stability, not just in inclusion, that's an important piece of it.
I just want to make sure Salome or Kate or Pacho or Marita, you also have some of the household stories, so please do leap in here. But at the highest level, of course, the study was about the businesses, not about the households. And so I can't say that we have really detailed data about that, but we have a lot of these anecdotes. We got to know, particularly the field researchers got to know these firms really well. But it is clear that the households are cushioning the firms as well as the firms cushioning the households. So there is this sort of safety valve going back and forth all of the time as firms decide to pull some money out of the business to buy some land so that there's a fallback if the business goes too far, or pulling money out to, certainly to pay school fees and other things for their children to provide that, but also to invest in other businesses of other family members to diversify the overall. So there certainly is that aspect of risk control, using the firm to buffer the household when things go really wrong, but also using the household to pull back in. And from the global perspective, Michelle and I were just in Uganda last week, talking to some other firms there, and one of the stories that struck us, as researchers, is we're doing an experiment in Uganda to see how much reports provided using the diaries might help someone manage things better. And hearing some of the participants, well, the reports really helped because I saw I was spending way too much money on my children. And so I cut back on what I was spending on my children to invest in my business. And Michelle and I think both of our hearts stopped. Like, as researchers, we really weren't hoping our impact was less money for children. But as the story goes on, it's like what they were really saying is, yeah, my children, I'm busy running my business. My child comes up and says, oh, the sweet vendor is walking by. Can I have a coin? 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 And being able to see the way some of that stuff leaks out and the blending. So, I want to be clear, they're not pulling their children out of school for their businesses. They're talking about not buying quite so much candy for their children. So maybe that's a positive. But it is an example of the way the businesses interact with the households that I think is really interesting and something that we can explore more.
Another question. I see one here.
Thank you so much. I'm just wondering, how can we use this study to change the mindset of those that are lending to the small firms and the policymakers in very practical terms? Because these guys are actually mitigating risk in many ways. They're very resilient, and they are the engine of growth in most economies. So if we understand that, how can we go beyond lip service and maybe conferences like this? Thank you.
It's a great question. I wish I had a very simple answer to it. But yeah, the person who asked the question just a moment ago, Melissa Coity, it leads something called the FinReg Lab, which focuses on consumer protection. And there's an overlap globally here on this issue because we see a lot of places, a lot of innovation around using better data. So using DFS creates data flows, cash transactions. You can lend against cash transactions, but you probably are not surprised to know that in a lot of places, lenders use that data to reduce their risk but not change their price. And that's really bad for what we're trying to accomplish here. But I think there is tremendous possibility here when we look at how these firms are resilient. Some of the stories that they were talking about, how resilient they are in managing their cash flows despite the volatility, should give us better information about what risk actually is, what loan terms should be, what flexibility in those loans should be, and how to appropriately risk those. And then we need regulation to go along with that to make sure that that reduction in risk that comes from that understanding gets passed along in lower costs to the borrower so that the loans do serve those purposes. But I think a lot of it has to do with both capturing the transactions like we did, and would love to get the insights here throughout the day from our field team about how to better capture that data and what we can do, but also then making sure that the benefits of using that data for better risk management gets passed along to the firms.
Great. James, you have a question? Or are you cutting us off?
No, sure, I have a question.
Okay, James and Radha, and then we'll answer those two.
There's a lot of talk. I know these businesses straddle the formality, informality all the time, moving between. And there's a lot of talk about how, particularly in government, how they can formalize these businesses. And I'd like to understand, I know that the informality is a way of handling risk, how we as development practitioners or government might enable the formalization of businesses. Just that.
Great. And then Radha, did you also have a question? Do you have a mic or?
So, good morning. My name is Radha Upadhyay. I'm an economist at the University of Nairobi. I'm just trying to make a link with this work and some earlier work also done by FSDK, where there was a lot showing that, because especially when you're talking about this issue of growth, some of that work showed that small firms don't want to grow in that specific niche or whatever their business is. They maybe in a way provide stability by just starting another business. So it's very difficult to map a trajectory of growth. And I'm kind of finding a disconnect between this work and that work. So just trying to explore that. Great.
So I just want to ask, anybody have a story about one of our firm owners running multiple businesses?
In terms of running multiple businesses, we have enterprises who have diversified. There's a gentleman we started, we were working on the project with. He started with poultry production. Then he also had a vegetable farm. And he also has a wood processing business. So in terms of diversification, sometimes they look at the seasonality or the risk. Maybe like the chicken, if they're infected, he would lose the chicken. So he looks at something else that he can do to move from the risk of that. And also looking at getting multiple streams of income and not just relying on one.
And I think that's exactly right, Salome. And I think the connection is, because of a lack of both working capital tools and risk management tools, what is a tool that's available? The tool that's available is starting a business in a completely unrelated sector that then dilutes how much gain you can make, but it puts a floor under how much loss you can take. And so when we think about that volatility chart, it's not just if you grow, the dip, it stays the same size, right? Some of these dips, even if you grow, the dip is going to go below zero. So if you're putting all of your eggs in that proverbial basket of the one business, which what is necessary to really grow, you're also exposing yourself to being absolutely wiped out. And I think it's understandable that the firms say, no, I don't want to grow in a way that leaves me at risk of losing everything that I've worked to build. So I'm going to do a little bit in a lot of different places. Now, James.
I want to get a story from one
Okay.
of them on the formalization. Do any of you have any stories of when someone was being pushed to formalize but didn't want to because it didn't really work for them?
I think not necessarily a story, but maybe the perception that is out there with the small farm owners. When you formalize your business, then you attract a lot of attention, especially from the government, in terms of tax payment. So they don't fully understand the other benefits that would come with having formalized your business. So a simple thing like asking for records was an uphill task. Like they wouldn't want to provide any records for their business. And initially when we started, they were not writing anywhere. So we introduced some notebooks because we realized they were forgetting stuff. So we introduced notebooks, just encouraging them to write, what you bought, from what suppliers, how much it costs, and how did you spend, where else did you spend your money, just to encourage them. Because for them, even record keeping is a form of formalization of the business. So it's more about the perception out there and how maybe the institutions can approach that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, James, you know this every bit as much as I do, and probably more so, is that anytime you see someone doing something that doesn't make sense, it's not that they're dumb, it's that you don't understand the costs. And I think that's what we see and hear from the firms is, yes, I would be proud to be formal, but it costs a lot of money and it carries no benefits. So given the choices that I have, that's at really the bottom of the list. And so I think the question is, are there more incremental stages of formalization for the government to start introducing things that cost less and start to give the pride of being a little bit more formal? And I think one of those ways that I think about specifically, while recognizing this is a really tough challenge to figure out regulation around, is that we know that these firms own businesses, but we also know that very few of them have KRA certificates. So those businesses are not, those bank accounts are not registered in the name of the business. And what an amazing source of data that would be if we could figure out which are the business accounts that aren't, or the personal accounts that are business accounts, and figure out a way of offering business bank accounts that don't require the firm to go all the way in formalization, and figuring out incremental steps that people can make that allows them to formalize a little bit more, allows us to capture better data that we can use for their benefit, and then introduces them to more benefits along the way.
Great. We've got a question back there, and then if we can...
Yeah, my name is Caleb Opon from the County Government of Kisumu. I'd like to ask all panelists whether they talked to any small-scale businesses that added value. I am particularly interested in carpentry, fundamentally because those people get the raw material, which is the wood, and turn it into something that's usable. When you look at the market, in my country, you'll find that most of the wood products that we use are imported. And this skill is already available. Our carpenters can make some of the best products that we have, but then go to any government office or any county office. The products are imported, Malaysia, Turkey, name it. So that ultimately, if you're looking for stability within the recommendations that you've made, one of them is, why don't we train these people to be the ones who provide these local products to our offices? That's a huge market. Then the final question I'm going to ask is, in your questions, when these people were growing up, or as they ventured into business, was it a residual profession? Was it because they did not get what they wanted to do, or purposefully, as they grew up, as they went through school, they wanted to be business people? Because if in the training process, they never wanted to be business people, they just wanted an occupation to survive, And it's like they're marking time, they're waiting for when they'll get the profession they want. So I know there's going to be a workshop after this, but then there's more that we could deliberate on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your responses and questions. I wanted to just ask a question around instability or volatility. Do we really understand the nature of the stability, and how much do they perceive it to be in the environment, the ecosystem, as opposed to now internally in their businesses?
So for the gentleman from Kisumu, Pacho, I know we have some carpenters in Kisumu. My experience with carpenters is there is a lot of value add there, but I'm interested in what you saw.
No, actually, we didn't have any carpenter respondents in Kisumu.
We had carpenters in Kwale.
The carpenters will want to have, you see, like maybe this table that is right in front of us, there is something like the end part of it. Maybe it does not have the machinery to do that, or they do not have resources to make such kind of table. They may have the skill, but now having the resources, because maybe something you have to import, some kind of wood, some kind of, some part of the furniture, you have to import it and put it on the furniture. So that is the gap. You find that they are skilled, but sometimes there is a gap whereby they can't have everything that they need. They don't know how to do it, and also the resources do not allow them to do that kind of stuff. So you find that the nice furniture has to be imported, because the carpenter in Kwale, he does not know how to do import. He does not want to get into customs and taxation and all that. He wants to make something, get a local customer, get his cash back, make another one, sell it, make a margin, live off it. So they don't want to make something sophisticated, which maybe stay for longer and not have an impact in their household. They want to make cash fast. So their target market is the local people. Someone in their household, your furniture is broken, I repair it for you, I do it for you. Maybe that can lead to another conversation. How can we have them have whatever that they need, understand how they can get whatever that they need, so that they can go to the next level. That's my take on that.
Maybe also to add on the level of skill for most of some of the business owners. For example, carpenter, that's what we are talking about. We have one respondent who is not a carpenter, but he owns a carpenter shop. So to be in business and doing a certain kind of business, you can be a business person promoting manufacturing without actually having that skill that is involved. So for him, he was like an overall manager, and he was always in business. He was always in the business premise, making sure that he has taken in all the orders, he has bought all the supplies that is needed, and managing his employees so that he can have them full-time, considering that there was a high employee turnover.
And to the answer to the question, did these firm owners want to be business owners, or were they just marking time? I think absolutely, I would say from everybody that I met, and I think you would agree, please do disagree with me if you don't, is there are lots of people around just marking time, and they are the workers. You don't start one of these businesses unless you really see that this is the future for you and your family. And so when we talk about this being a distinct group, in the micro sector, we used to talk about buying a job, right? That a lot of these loans were going to people who they really wanted was a job. There are no jobs, so they're starting just a firm until they can find a job. But for these businesses, that's one of the ways that they're different. They are business people. They conceive of themselves as business people. They have a vision for their business. They're not just waiting around for something else to happen. And then I really want to emphasize what Marita said about the asking firms to add a lot of value for a product that has a slow turnover when they have such liquidity problems. They need to turn their raw materials back into cash on a very frequent basis. So they must make things that turn over quickly. So they must make things that have lots of demand in their neighborhoods, which are things that are relatively lower value. So, if we want to break that cycle, we need to help them get into the markets so that they can turn those things over quickly and in the cash conversion cycle. And Ruth, remind me of your question.
Stability.
What I had asked was when we talk about volatility, instability that is felt by the business owner, how much of that is in the ecosystem as opposed to actually within the business itself?
So it certainly seems to me, and again, I would want to ask the group here, that the majority of it is the system, the ecosystem. And like one of those stories that just blew me away was, we went into the study expecting to see a lot of seasonality, particularly in agri-processing. And to be honest, we didn't see the seasonality that we expected at all, but we did see seasonality in businesses that I would never have expected for reasons that I didn't expect. So I was talking to one of the carpenters, and he said, well, no, we're not going to sell anything this month. That's kind of strange. You're making couches, you're making why is this a month why you're not going to sell anything? He says, because school starts. I'm sitting there thinking, as the person who's not from Kenya, why does school starting have anything to do with whether you buy a couch? But of course, I think all of you know exactly why school starting means you don't buy a couch. All the customers were saving money to pay the school fees. At the same time, we find that the metal workers, school starting is the best time of year because everybody has to buy a trunk. And so understanding the seasonality that affects businesses that you wouldn't necessarily think of as seasonal. But that's just one of those examples of the system more than the choices necessarily of the individual firms.
I visited a furniture maker in Nairobi. You know the story, and it was right after the elections. And all of a sudden, it was full because they had basically let their stock go all the way down because we didn't know what was going to happen, and they were afraid of fires and things that could be happening. And so everybody had, and people didn't know what was going to happen, so they weren't going to make that big purchase of a sofa set. But now, all of a sudden, the elections were done. People were ready to buy sofa sets, and it was really funny because the day we were visiting, a vehicle caught on fire. Do you remember? Right outside the furniture shop, and she had just gotten finished talking about, and it's another example. You can't expect a truck to catch on fire, but you can look at things, these instability things in the ecosystem, like election cycles and uncertainty around what's going to happen. I'm being given the signal that we are out of time. We could clearly keep speaking all morning on this. We are just scratching the surface. Please, please, please do look into the data and the papers. I think you'll find them fascinating. I read one on a Saturday and I didn't regret it. Back to you, James.
But also take advantage of our field team being here. Ask them questions. They have even more stories than we do.
And they're going to join for the policy workshop for those of you who are joining, so you can get more from them there.
Thanks, Tamara and team. Just please stay on the stage. Please stay on the stage. This is a launch. So we're going to have a symbolic launch of the diaries, and then everybody's free to take some breath, and then we'll start at 11 o'clock sharp with the workshops. I would ask, there's a team of special people that we couldn't have done this without, and they are the advisors. So any advisors in the room, I'd ask you to come on stage as well. Join me on the stage. We have one. Come on, Anne.
Yeah.
Come on, kid. The advisor, yes. And if everybody, including those on the stage, can gather around the... there's a present there that's going to be unveiled. Gather round over here. Yes, please. And I'm going to ask one of the field team, Kate, can you please come? And then I'll ask Tamara to stand on the other side. Yes. I think you get, yes. So,
like some music or some drum roll? Can we get a drum roll in the audience?
3, 2, 1, 0. Thank you very much. So, it's now officially launched. If you can read it, go ahead and do so. We'll take a break for 45 minutes? No, 40 minutes. If you could be here at 5:02, we'll divide up into the strategy workshops. Yeah. So those people who are staying and who know they are staying, please do so. Otherwise, this event is now closed. Yes, of course, there's tea, coffee, snacks, place to stretch your legs. Thank you very much for bearing with us, and have a good day.